Unspoken Issues.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Unspoken Issues podcast. We are coming back at you with a new DC comic to talk about. And this is right on the edge, the precipice of the millennium. September of 1999, Living Assault Weapons is on the stands. 6-issue series, like I said, dated September of 1999. Our creative team, Bob Layton, writer/ink artist Dick Giordano, penciler John E. Workman Jr., letterer Tom Ziocco, colorist Digital Chameleon, separator David Michelini. That's a name I've heard before. So there's your creative team. What we've got to do here real quick is I've got to introduce the guys that have been on here along with me this whole time. Dean Compton, are you ready to talk Living Assault Weapons?
I'm really ready because I don't miss a chance to talk about the Charlton guys. I'm a Charlton mark. I like the action heroes. I actually just picked up the Charlton Companion from Tomorrow's. It's a little dense so far. I just started and wow, it is a crazy company from its inception, which was founded in a jail cell between a guy who had been selling copyrighted lyrics and another guy who used to be a lawyer who had gotten disbarred for embezzlement in the city he worked for. And they were like, he's like, hey, well, I can help you, legally get that stuff. And he's like, well, I've already built an illegal empire. John Santolangelo had already built an illegal empire selling these song lyrics, and they met.
What?
And that's how Charlton Publications was formed. Later on, it would, they do comic books. They did the magazine Hit Parader was theirs, which later on it would be like a big magazine in the heavy metal, hard rock, the 80s and early 90s. They made their money on that. They got a printing press and they never stopped it because they would lose money. And they did everything in-house. They printed their own comics. They had a writer on site. They had artists on site. Now they did do, Steve Ditko and Pat Boyette and a few other people did freelance, from elsewhere. But they had Joe Gill on site. They had all this on site. They had their own distribution company. They did everything themselves. And these guys, the Sarge Steel, Blue Beetle, Captain Atom, Nightshade, Judomaster, The Question, Peacemaker, they're all from the what's called the Action Heroes era of Charlton Comics. Dick Giordano was the editor at Charlton at that time, he's doing the penciling here. They did they switched focus for a little bit around 1966-67. They got the Hero game. These guys are called the Action Heroes. There's a famous house ad where it's like Charlton Action Heroes. They aren't half bad. They had a really funny, self-deprecating. Dick Giordano did the letters pages, really self-deprecating humor. They would, unlike Marvel or DC, they would talk about Marvel or DC. Positively or negatively. So, make a long story longer, I'm just a Charlton mark. I like these characters. I don't necessarily like this, but it's anytime I can see the Charlton guys and I can see them together, I'm always in. I just have a place in my heart for it. I'm honestly not sure why exactly. I think it's just because it's something that I learned as when I was first getting into superheroes as a mark, that then I could lord over other people. Like, we all saw Shadowhawk come out at the same time. But motherfucker, do you know anything about the Fighting Five?
Well, Darry, this, I believe, was one of your suggestions. Am I correct there?
It was, and I have regretted it this entire time.
You should have said guilty as charged.
Yeah, I've always meant to read this series. I am not a Charlton fan. I did not know anything about these characters. I just knew Watchmen was based on them. So when this series came out back in the day, I was always curious about it. I couldn't pick it up because I had too many books on my pull list in 1999. We were talking recently, and I threw it out there, and you all were nice enough to pick up on it. You
dodged that bullet for 23 years.
This is definitely one of those series where I finally read it, and I thought to myself, well, there was a reason you didn't read it before now. So I will say, though, I have to give this book credit. Law is written in a style that was antiquated even at the time it came out, and certainly doesn't fit with the other books on the stands today.
99.
And I read a lot of modern comics, and a lot of them are incredibly decompressed, and they take forever to get going. This was almost fun as an exercise to go back and to read a comic written in the style of even probably before the three of us were reading, but coming out in 99 just to kind of continue to tell that type of story. So just from the mechanical point of view, I really enjoyed the construction of it. Like I really enjoyed looking at it and seeing this artifact that was on the stands at the same time as Grant Morrison's Justice League and everything else that closed out the 90s. So from that perspective, I am happy I read it. I probably enjoyed it more now than I would have then, because I definitely know 15-year-old me would not have appreciated the semi-archaic style. So.
Right. Well, we're going to run down.
15-year-old you have appreciated how easy Sarge Steel bagged that lady.
Sarge Steel was the breakout character for me. In fact, I think Watchmen would have been better if they had Sarge Steel in it. I want to say that at the top.
That's an incredibly hot take, because I don't know how Watchmen could be better. If only there was a guy with a metal hand.
If Dave Gibbons had drew into the background a guy with a metal hand saying, "Is that a squid in New York?" That book, Alan Moore would leave his name on it. That's how good
things would have changed.
He would have given his keynote at the Anarchist Magician Foundation for the year 2022, and he would have said, "This addition to my comic is so good, I'm keeping my name on it. I watched the movie."
Then he would have like held his hand up and like chopped it off and been like, "And now I'm Sarge Steel." But it was all a magic trick. He never chopped his hand off at all. He got them all.
No, the thing is,
it's both a magic trick and there's a snake where his left hand used to be, both at the same time.
This is frightening. This is. Oh, wow. We worked G.I. Joe into that somehow. All right.
I've got a scrap iron shirt. So.
Transformers is coming up soon. Don't worry, folks.
I'm wearing a Transformers shirt right now.
Oh, look at it right there. It is. So we're going to break down these characters here because we got quite a few that we are going to be talking about that are in this story. Dean's going to help me out here, but we're going to start out with Sarge Steel. Sergeant Steel, created by Joe Gill, Dick Giordano, first appeared in Sarge Steel #1 from December of 1964. Now, he's currently known as Director Steel. In this story, he's got a pretty high appointment within the U.S. government. Dean, why don't you lay it on us here? Give us your best description of Sarge Steel.
Honestly, I like Sarge Steel a lot, but the best way to say Sarge Steel is that he's Nick Fury with more like private eye influence. Like he's got a lot more of that, trench coat cigar. I mean, I know Nick Fury has a cigar, but he's like, I can't believe that there's been another murder. He's kind of more a little working class is wrong to get Nick Fury's like this, but he's just a little more in that direction. It's hard to see Sarge Steel bagging the Valentina Contessa without her throwing herself at him, which that'll happen to old Sarge. But basically, yeah, Sarge Steel, fought in World War II. He, I believe it originally lost his hand, had a metal hand, and then became a spy guy, much like Nick Fury. For a long time, he was in charge of the CBI, the Central Bureau of Intelligence, I believe. And then I think at this point, he's in charge of... it's like I can't remember, but it's the meta-humans now. They've moved on. It's not Dio, but it's kind of like, it's like the Bureau of Metahuman Affairs, I think is what it is, maybe. But yeah, he basically fills a very Nick Fury type role, very active. He was a very active player in Suicide Squad, Checkmate. You would usually see him in that type of thing, doing that type of role, being like, these heroes, I don't trust them, but with God, I depend on them. So, basically, Sarge Steel, gumshoe spy.
Okay, all right. Next up, we got The Question, Vic Sage, created by Steve Ditko, first appeared Blue Beetle, Volume 5, #1 from June of 1967. Vic is a news reporter. Now, he has this thing, according to what I was reading here, this thing called the pseudoderm. Is that still a thing? Is that what's going on here, where he puts this artificial skin over his face, disguises himself, it basically removes his facial features, and he's fine,
but still dresses for success, and I respect that.
That's right. He looks
He's wearing a tie and a hat. Listen, if he had to go to a wedding or a fancy dinner, even if he didn't have a face, he would fit in.
Now, he fights crime as a vigilante. Even though he's this news reporter by day, he's a vigilante by night. So,
The Question was created by Steve Ditko, more or less, as almost a personification of his objectivist ideas. A very controversial thing is The Question let somebody die. I think possibly in his first appearance. He lets him drown in the sewer, and he's like, why the fuck would I try and save you? I might die. You asked for this. And that was very controversial at that time that a hero would do that. He teamed up with Blue Beetle a lot. Again, almost like if Batman were Clark Kent instead of Bruce Wayne. He does the reporting, and then he would use his leads as a reporter to go hit somebody in the head, because that's how you solve problems. Later on, after the Charlton heroes are bought by DC, and of course Rorschach is his analog in Watchmen, Denny O'Neil and Dennis Cowan reimagine the character, and he becomes like kind of a Zen guy. He learns how to like ninja kick, and he winds up on he gets his own title, I think, in 88. And between like 88 and 95, like there are a few guys who are on the periphery of the DC universe. The most noteworthy being like Green Arrow and The Question, and their stuff's a lot more real. And it seems like the only guy from the DC universe they ever really talked to is like Batman. There's actually a really good poster of the three of them, and they crossed over into like each other's annuals several times. Eventually, The Question and Green Arrow both kind of wind up more central figures in the DC universe. Later on, The Question will die during the 52 saga and be replaced by Renee Montoya. But the whole thing is he does, later on, he's a much more like liberal, open-minded, guy who's much more even, much more even-keeled when he's not in the face of abject injustice. The faceless thing is really great because it's the idea that somehow he will be perfectly imbalanced and you can never really tell which way he's leaning. That's kind of the metaphor there, that, he's an incredible arbiter of justice. I mostly just think it's cool, no face, ninja kicks people. I can't say for sure, but it seems like there's a little Spirit influence there. Will Eisner's Spirit. I like the Spirit too, don't get me wrong, but this is a neat way to spin it, a different way to go with those, like that central look and a similar concept.
Okay. All right. Next up, we're going to talk Blue Beetle. Now, I've got a couple of things here. I want to set some groundwork, a little bit of history. So in 1964, Charlton Comics began publishing, this is straight from the wiki, a new series of Blue Beetle, which substantially revamped the hero, reinventing him as a university professor and altering the spelling of his name to Dan Garrett.
Dan Garrett.
Yep. First issue was cover dated of June of 1964, but in 1966, Blue Beetle was reinvented again in a set of backup stories published in Captain Atom, number 83, cover dated November of 66 through 86, plotted and drawn by Steve Ditko. They introduced Ted Cord, a student of Dan Garrett's, who took on the role of Blue Beetle following Garrett's apparent death. The only other thing I want to throw in here at the beginning of the story is that Blue Beetle has carpal tunnel syndrome.
2 jokes. I think we get 2 jokes about it, right?
Limit.
And also, like, one of them is made by Plastic Man. What an asshole. You don't even have, like, fucking bones. Like, fuck you. Oh, we're going to carpal tunnel syndrome. We can't all become a goddamn toaster. You know what I mean? Like, dude, other people have problems with their muscles and bones. Piece of fucking shit. I can tell you used to be a bad guy. Not only did you used to be a bad guy, but then you went and joined the FBI. Now you're a worse guy? Fucking piss off, Neil O'Brien. Honestly, I love Plastic Man. You got to check it out. Like, Ty Templeton's Plastic Man's amazing. And the old school 40s Jack Cole Plastic Man, mind-blowingly good. At least 25, 35 years ahead of its time.
Wow.
All of that's true. I want to interject very quickly. If you are listening to this podcast and you have never read Kyle Baker's Plastic Man.
Also great, yeah.
Press pause. Go get it. The entire thing is collected by DC. It is one of the best comics ever made. If nothing else, it is hilarious.
Blue Beetle's a very interesting character, both like inside and outside of this. Blue Beetle was actually started by Fox Comics, by Victor Fox, who was like, in an era, in a shady business, in this shady business's shadiest era. He was probably the shadiest of characters. At this time, for anybody who doesn't know, and I'd be surprised if anybody listening to this doesn't know, but comic books in the late 30s and through the 40s, a lot of them were made by like creative houses, and they would be packaged and then sent on. And Fox, did that for a little bit, but then he was like, motherfucker, I should just publish these myself. What am I doing here? And there's a whole bunch of shenanigans in regard to that, but they create Blue Beetle, Dan Garrett, who's a cop. And he takes a super vitamin, and that's how he gets, his, like, I think, super strength and super speed. And Blue Beetle was actually, I wouldn't say a major success, but a fairly, like, for what it was at the time, fairly prominent. It got, like, it had a radio serial. And, think about the guys who had radio serials at the time, the superheroes. You're talking Batman and Robin, you're talking Superman, and you're talking Captain Marvel and Captain America, and that's fucking it. You know what I mean? So the fifth guy is the Blue Beetle, and that's really good company to be in.
Right.
Honestly.
Right.
Now, his serial was like fucking shitty. Don't get me wrong. Like nobody, nobody's like, oh man, you ought to get a reel of that. Listen to it the way it was meant to be listened to. Nobody's saying that. But I think it is important. Well, somewhere along the way, Victor Fox ripped off enough people, and I think went broke after somewhere in the mid 50s and sold the Blue Beetle to Charlton.
Okay.
They republished it, basically because, Charlton never met an opportunity to reprint a comic that it did not take up. From it started till it's been the last 5 years, except for some Ditko stuff and 1981 and 80, I think it was called Charlton Bullseye, where people worked for free. They didn't put anything out that was new. You know what I mean? They just reprint old Army stuff, reprint the old cowboy shit, just reprint it. Whatever. We don't have to pay anything for it. Huh. So then they got Steve Ditko, who started working on Captain Atom, and then they kind of, retooled the Blue Beetle at the same time doing those backups. Then they let Steve Ditko go wild and just, completely reinvent the character, get rid of Dan Garrett and because at this time when they retool him, he uses a magic scarab to get his powers. But that gets, he gets killed. Ted Kord's there. The scarab's lost. Ted Kord, it's like, I'm going to, do this to help avenge your death and to make up for it. Ultimately, the Blue Beetle is basically Spider-Man meets Iron Man in a lot of ways. The Bug connection, Ted Kord, Blue Beetle anyway, the Bug connection, he's a really smart guy, but he's doing this because his mentor died. There's a lot of overlaps between those two. And Blue Beetle, honestly, until recently, probably was the most prominent of any of the Charlton guys. Had a really good series in 86, was in the Justice League for a long time, died during Infinite Crisis, got brought back. The legacy continued with Jaime Reyes, until Peacemaker really broke out. He was probably the most well-known of the Charlton guys. So I'm a big fan. I think everybody who read comic books in the 90s, it's kind of like the Gin Blossoms. Nobody hates the Blue Beetle. It may not be your favorite band, but nobody hates the Gin Blossoms. And nobody hates Blue Beetle. Especially when he gets with Booster Gold, one of the best superhero pairings of all time, honestly.
Right.
I was going to say, if I hadn't read a substantial number of Blue Beetle Booster Gold books, I would hate Blue Beetle, because every time I look at him, I just think, you left Spider-Man for this? You abandoned Spider-Man because you hated Stan Lee for this? But then he teams up with Booster Gold, and I love everything they do. I
really like the 60s stuff that, Steve Ditko did with Blue Beetle, honestly. I mean, you're right. It's unfair to compare it to Spider-Man, honestly. Why did Radiohead ever make as good albums as Amnesiac, Kid A, and OK Computer? I don't know. Sometimes people just, that's the best they were ever going to do. I don't think it's fair. I think if you accept Blue Beetle for what it is, I think you like it a lot. But I do understand a lot of people can't do that. Everybody's not as, refined as I am. The ability to, separate. No, for real. I do that with some things too, so I get it. But honestly, when I first saw Blue Beetle, didn't know that whole story. I saw Blue Beetle for the first time when I got the DC Cosmic cards. So I didn't think to compare him to Spider-Man. To me, he's just he's a guy in the DC universe,
Right. The most I knew about Blue Beetle was stuff that I was reading probably from DC in the late 80s. I was reading Armageddon 2001, some of the stuff that was happening around that time.
The Eclipse crossover?
Maybe. So I don't...
Superman?
Death of Superman for sure. I mean, that's where he gets his ass beat. Right.
Yeah. Imagine that a guy with no superpowers goes against the ultimate Kryptonian death weapon. Somehow doesn't win the fight.
Yeah, but lives at least. Thank goodness.
Hey, Superman didn't. So I guess that means Blue Beetle is tougher than Superman, right? Doomsday killed Superman, but he could not kill Ted Kord.
Well, let's move to Peacemaker, Mitchell Black. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Now. This is the original Peacemaker, I believe, is what we're getting here. I don't think Mitchell Black have a history in Charlton? Or
no, this is a brand new Peacemaker thing. What's his name? Christopher Smith is the Peacemaker from Charlton, and he's the Peacemaker until I think Eclipso 15. I think he's in the Shadowhunters, and they all get aced by Eclipso.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. I got it written down here. Mitchell Black's first appearance is Living Assault Weapons #1 from September of 99, created by Bob Layton, Dick Giordano. This is a physician who
Think
lost
of the
his
royalties
life.
they're getting. Think about it. Mitchell Black.
Right.
household name.
Mitchell Black. Physician.
Mitch.
Good old Mitch. That's what I call him. Mitch was a physician who lost his license, gets recruited by the Peacemaker Project. Real interesting kind of dichotomy here where he's like, his background is being a doctor and helping people, but he's, part of this project where they are putting him in armor and sending him out to fight things. He is the third Peacemaker from what I've read.
He's the bones of the DC universe because he's always like, I'm a doctor. He never seems to.
Damn it, Jim. Damn it, Sarge.
He's the latest in the Peacemaker line. They've done this Peacemaker Project thing now where there's lots of them. Historically, Peacemaker's a guy who loves peace so much he's willing to kill for it. Rich guy who, sets up a lot of philanthropic organizations to help orphans and things like that, but also is like, hey, these nations are going to war or these entities are going to war. I better get in my big fancy helicopter and shoot them with Sidewinder missiles. So I love Peacemaker, to say the least. I don't like this version of Peacemaker, not because of the character or anything. I don't like the way it looks. I like the classic look a lot better. And I don't like this whole Project Peacemaker thing. It's pretty weird. It's also weird that it's so top secret that Sarge Steel didn't know about it, but Sarge Steel knew about Project Peacemaker from back in the day, from when he was in charge of Task Force X, and that was part of under his command. But I guess he forgot. Maybe he's got lead poisoning from his metal hand, and it's affecting his memory.
That could be. Then we have Nightshade, Eve Eden, created by David Kaler and Steve Ditko. The character first appeared in Captain Atom number 82 from September of '66, originally published by Charlton Comics. My power set that I have here listed is magic, enhanced strength, shadow teleportation. Those are the three main things that really define her. And she's definitely a different character at the beginning of this story versus as we go through it, because something big happens that changes things. But
it's funny when they first introduced her, she didn't have any powers. The teleportation stuff comes later. When she first showed up, she's just like a super ninja spy. And obviously that's, why Silk Spectre in Watchmen doesn't have any powers, even though they're analogs. She doesn't have that because it didn't come into play until Suicide Squad, I believe. But great character, the only lady of the action heroes from the Charlton lineup. So good for her. Way to get things done.
All right. So next up is Judomaster, Ripley Jagger, created by Joe Gill and Frank McLaughlin. Special War Series number 4 was the first appearance of this character. Judomaster was fighting behind enemy lines with his pal Tiger. We'll get to that here in a second. But after his journey, after World War II ended, he ended up living in the hidden city of Nanda Parbat, which actually slowed his aging. So when we're introduced to him in this story, he's been a character that's been around since World War II, but he is as young as everybody else here. So,
boy, he sure is good at judo, and he sure did do it against the Japanese. Joe Gill, the co-creator, though, might be the most prolific comic book writer of all time. He was the writer at Charlton. Like I said, they brought everything in-house, and he wrote it all. War comics, superhero comics, westerns, romances, and he would come in it was like his 9-to-5 job. That's what he did. He wrote comic books all day, and he wrote probably I would hazard a guess about 85% of the Charlton output ever. Again, I haven't gotten to the whole companion yet. But I'm sure it will confirm somewhere in that ballpark. But yeah, that's really it with Judomaster. They try and reinvent him a couple times, in the Justice League Quarterly we also read. And I think later Doomsday rips him in half during the Battle of Metropolis.
Ooh.
That seems like something that happened that sounds familiar.
About an Infinite Crisis, right?
Yeah. The Battle of Metropolis and Infinite Crisis. I think Doomsday rips him in half. And also, I can't help but think, when I hear Judomaster, I think about Taz, because he used the kata hajime, that judo hold, the Taz mission, as he called it.
Right.
He would choke you out with the kata hajime. He learned that from judo. And I also think about Bad News Brown, another wrestler, but he was legitimately a judo guy. He won the bronze medal in the Olympics in judo. So yeah, every time I think Judomaster, I'm like, but could he take Bad News Brown? Could he take Taz? But just very much a character of the times that really hard to work in anywhere else. Also, Nanda Parbat and Ramakrishna, that's Dead Man stuff. That comes from the it's really neat to see that come into play here, but that's the deity that brought Boston Brand back to life as a ghost, and he's been to Nanda Parbat a lot. So way to go. I really like seeing that used here. Not a Charlton thing, but it's cool to see that come into play here.
You know, we should mention that Judomaster is the only Charlton character who appeared on the Peacemaker TV show. So if you found us by accident and you were watching the Peacemaker show on HBO Max, the guy in the green costume who was very good at martial arts, that is this Judomaster that we're going to be talking about tonight. The show didn't adapt too much because unfortunately the character's history hasn't aged all that well. But
Not really.
Yeah. And part of that is acknowledged here, but just for name recognition, like I think most people might actually know who the Judomaster is as opposed to Nightshade or Captain Atom.
Yeah. Significantly less bags of Cheetos in these issues for Judomaster.
I still haven't seen Peacemaker yet. I really need to see that. I know it's good. Yeah. It's one of those things, guys, as I get older, like I really have to be in a mood to do something. The mood hasn't struck me. I'm busy reading Flash number 222.
One of the heavy hitters of this series who gets sidelined pretty quickly. Captain Atom. So Nathaniel Atom, created by Joe Gill, artist and co-writer Steve Ditko, first appeared Space Adventures number 33 from 1960, March of 1960. Power set wise, I grabbed a quote from the wiki, which I thought was great. You know, I did not even, like, if you go to the list of powers under the DC wiki, I mean, it goes on. You have to scroll and scroll and scroll and just keep reading and keep reading. Here it is. My name is Captain Atom, as an A-bomb, as a nuclear fission, as in the end of the world. Straight from Captain Atom's mouth, apparently.
You know, he's a Dr. Manhattan analog, kind of like Solar as well. Firestorm to an extent, like he can affect quantum realities and do stuff. But much like Green Lanterns, he's very unimaginative. Like Green Lanterns have like the most powerful weapon in the universe. Like, I'll make a big boxing glove and hit you with it. You know, I mean, like, which is cool, but yeah, that's the best you can think of. He's the same. He's like, man, I have the power of the sun. I'll shoot a ray at you. You know, I mean, like, which again, fine. It's interesting to note that Captain Atom, like, predates the Marvel Universe. That, like, this, you know, he was actually created before Fantastic Four came out, Spider-Man, etc. He is the guy of the action heroes that has the most power. They depower him a little bit later in the Charlton thing. He, like I said, he's a Dr. Manhattan analog. He got his own series pretty quickly. I think it starts in like 88 and runs to like 91. And like, I remember the first time I saw Captain Atom, I was like reading like Comics Values Monthly or Wizard, and it was like in the price guide, and it was like the cover, you know, they would put covers every so often, and this was the one where Swamp Thing was beating him up. And I knew who Swamp Thing was because I watched the USA show. So that piqued my interest. I was like, who's this Captain Atom guy? I feel like he's a guy who always shows up, and this happens to him here. He always shows up as like, oh, here's a powerful guy who can get beat so the other guys can show up.
Right.
You know, the other people can do something. I mean, great character, was going to be the big bad in Armageddon 2001. Didn't quite work out that way. They replaced him with Hawk because the secret got out. He seems to always be on the periphery of everything important that happens with DC through the 90s. And then also, I think he winds up going to the Wildstorm universe for a while and like hanging out there, you know, and eventually he just becomes Monarch at some point, but then I think he face turns back again.
I was very excited to see him get his costume at the end of Law, because that's the costume he wears when someone at DC is like, well, we have Captain Atom and we do not know what to do with him, but he's on this Justice League Unlimited show, so we should do something. We're going to shunt him off to Wildstorm. And basically, Jesse, what you mentioned about him ending the world actually happens. Like, I don't remember the exact details, but for some reason, going to the Wildstorm universe makes him unstable, and at the end of the series, everything ends. And that's their way of saying, yeah, it's not a great comic. I'm not saying anyone should go read it, but that's one of the many reasons that now there are the Wildcats and the Authority and Stormwatch are part of the DC proper, whatever the main universe is called. They're no longer off on their own. So
okay,
Captain Atom, y'all.
Nice. Our villain of this piece goes by the name of Avatar. Let's just say they have a vested interest in some of the heroes that we talked about here earlier, at least specifically one. They are powerful enough to where they have control over these things called, I'm going to butcher this, I'm sure, the Ravenans, the Ravanans, something like that. They're demonic minions that the Avatar.
I wonder if it's pronounced like Ravenous. Like,
Ravenous?
Ravenous? I can't say. I don't want to be insulting. This could be a genuine mythological thing from the India, Pakistan region or what have you. So I don't want to assume that, but that could be possible.
I mean, it could very well be. those are villains of this piece. So
for anyone listening who's not aware of this fact, the people involved, specifically the creator Dick Giordano, in this book in Law that came out in 1999, they were involved with the book originally in the 60s. So this is not an instance of someone looking around and saying, oh, hey, I really want to play with the action heroes. I really want to do a story with them. This is someone who was involved with their inception and cared about them a great deal, saying, I want to take this opportunity to let these characters have one great story, and for whatever reason it was allowed to happen. So this is actually
they were trying to do this from the time they got them, because Paul Levitz actually bought them, from what I understand, as like a gift for Dick Giordano, and then he kept them away for a while. It's one of the reasons why they weren't in Watchmen, because he was, at some point he was going to get to do something, and he was the editor-in-chief, and it just never happened until 1999.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Alan Moore's plan with these heroes was to kill them, and then somebody came in and said, no, wait a second, we just got those guys, you can't do that with them. Is that right?
Basically, that's what Dick Giordano said.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, my understanding is that they're DC, right? And this guy from England just fixed Swamp Thing, and these other English people are fixing Sandman and Animal Man and the Doom Patrol. So they're basically like, hey, we just bought the action heroes. Do you want to play with them? And Alan Moore was like, oh, yeah, you know what? I think I might want to do that. I had a couple of ideas for the Archie characters, but you don't own them. Give me a couple of weeks. And then he comes back with, I don't remember what the original title was. It wasn't Watchmen, but Watchmen. And they were like, this is really good, but you're going to make these characters unusable. And we just paid for them. Like, could you file the serial numbers off? Which is why we have Rorschach, who is a household name, as opposed to the Question, who is incredibly well known. But I mean, Rorschach is Rorschach, or everyone knows who Rorschach is. So.
Well, let's go ahead. We'll get into the first three issues here real quick. Real quick synopsis. The Justice League has disappeared along with its Watchtower headquarters. The culprit, mystical being by the name of Avatar, now has the world's militaries in their sights, using demonic underlings called Ravenons to attack. Shortly after, Captain Atom is soon captured by Avatar, and now the White House is to act fast in order to address the threat by having Director Steel contact the Peacemaker Project. Meanwhile, the Question and Blue Beetle investigate to find where Avatar is calling home, running into a recently returning Judomaster. Commander Steel soon summons the trio to the Peacemaker Project, where they meet up with the now emotionless Eve Eden, Nightshade, and Mitchell Black, the soldier of the Peacemaker Project. They enact a plan to infiltrate Avatar's stronghold, and during the mission, Judomaster is captured and Blue Beetle's bug is heavily damaged. Heading back to Project Peacemaker to regroup, the team learns there is a traitor that is feeding Avatar information. By the end of issue 3, Judomaster learns the shocking revelation of his enemy's identity, and that is his friend from the past, World War II past, Tiger.
One of the biggest problems with this series is, for a series that was ostensibly designed to get the Charlton guys over for a new generation, it's centered around the Justice League and how everything won't work unless the Justice League shows up. Justice League's on like the first 2 pages, you know what I mean? It's also another thing that keeps coming up that bothers me a lot, and it starts with Batman, and then Blue Beetle continues it. There's an earthquake on the moon, and Batman's like, that's impossible, there's no fault lines here. There's got to be half a dozen guys in the DC universe who can make an earthquake. Major disaster immediately comes to mind. And then later, Judomaster does stuff pulls some nails out of a fence so they can go through it. And then later we'll change his molecular structure so that he can phase through some restraints. And Blue Beetle's like, that's impossible. You're on a Justice League with Superman, Captain Marvel, Dr. Fate, Captain Atom, Bloodwind, Maxima, Guy Gardner. What the fuck are you talking about? What the fuck are you talking about? This is impossible. It's just bad writing. It's really just bad writing. Really, really. Because they really want to get Judomaster over he is, something very special. And I'm not saying that was the wrong thing to do, but they do a shitty job of it because of that. The Project Peacemaker thing, again, like I said, it's weird that Director Steel wouldn't know about it. It's also amazing how he's just talking to Bill Clinton. They just drew Bill Clinton. It was just right on.
Yeah, that's Bill Clinton.
That's Bill Clinton. The problem, and I hate doing this about this stuff, but it doesn't work. The first 3 issues don't work. I don't like very much that happens in it. These are characters that I love. I don't like that, like, they take Captain Atom out of it immediately and then he doesn't do anything else the whole series. Like, until they get him out of his prison. What are you giving me here? If this is going to be the Charlton heroes and we're getting them together and you're putting them all on the covers, then they need to all team up at some point. You said there's a team named the Living Assault Weapons, which is shitty, by the way. Joey Cavallari is like the editor on this, and I'm just shocked that he's associated with something this bad. He's such a great talent. You know, the 2099 line when he was there was so tight, just wild, you know. But of course, you're dealing with the legend Dick Giordano and Bob Layton, who he's pushing from what I understand. But they never give you that big team-up moment. The most powerful guy just doesn't do anything. It's all centered around these guys doing stuff so they can free the real heroes. It just doesn't come together. I don't like all these peacemakers. I don't care for the new peacemaker. I wish they had gone with that classic look, like I said earlier, with the half helmet and the red and the blue. I don't know. It just doesn't come together for me. Those are most of my notes from the first 3 issues. I did like the Nanda Parbat stop. I'm a mark for that. It was cool to see those things mentioned. Wow, that lady who throws herself at Sarge Steel. That's just bad. It's like funny in the best way because it's just so stupid, but it's so repulsive. It's just terrible. Like, is Sarge Steel just like one of their fiction suits? Because, like, man, all he does is cool stuff and say cool things, and he makes out with the hot lady 40 years younger than him, and he's been shot 100 times, and they have sex.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. So those are pretty much my notes. An incredibly lackluster start to something that doesn't even get to the level of mediocrity. It's like a collection of Motley Crue B-sides. Why?
Why did we need to know Sarge Steel could get laid? Like, this is something that we had to know?
I don't know, because they're also obsessed with carpal tunnel syndrome, and they kind of insinuate that maybe Blue Beetle got it from jacking off. But, like, so maybe they're like, hey, Sarge Steel's better get laid because he can't jack off. You know what I mean? Like,
well, he is missing a hand.
Yeah. It's not good. Also, like, don't they basically say Blue Beetle is embezzling from his company? Where, like, he gets a contract, and then they're like, hey, questions like, hey, how much of that $500 million do you have left? Don't ask. That's not how you run a company. You can't just have $500 million and be like, oh, I'll build an airship that's also submersible. You can't do that, Ted Cord.
They're going to want the receipts, sir, on the money that you spent.
You have a CFO. I watch a lot of episodes of American Greed, buddy. It doesn't usually turn out well. On the other hand, he can go underwater, so I guess they will never catch him.
I'm with Dean. A couple of things that I did like. He mentioned how the Justice League is up front. I think that's what originally attracted me to this in 1999. Like, you have the Morrison Justice League right up front. So if you're in the store and you're flipping through this, you see the Watchtower, you see the New Gods, you see all the hallmarks of that later, more successful run than when Blue Beetle and Captain Atom and the others were on in the 80s during Justice League International. But there's a couple other cameos that I love. The character of Fate shows up in the first issue.
Yeah.
So that's the 90s version of Dr. Fate, who had a cool Ankh tattoo over his eye.
Good old Jared Stevens.
I mean, yeah, he mainly shows up to rip the... What was it? He did something to Eve that caused her to become...
She has a succubus inside her, and I guess...
There you go.
Out.
I guess so.
What's funny, though, is this would have been coming out in real time around the same time as the first few issues of Robinson and Jeff Johns' JSA. And in the first few issues there, like, Fate gets killed by Mordru. And in this character, and in this issue, he's like, oh man, I better have this wine. I wonder if it goes well with Taco Bell. Was he drunk? Did he let his guard down? And that's why he got aced by Mordru? He's supposed to be like the protector, the Lord of Order. He's out here farting out a chalupa while he's hammered, and that's how Mordru got him.
But you can almost picture Giordano or Layton writing the script where it was like, and then Dr. Fate shows up and does this thing to Nightshade so that we can have her have no emotion for the rest of the story. And some editor was,
reason.
Yeah, exactly. But some editor was
what does that add?
It adds nothing. It adds
it's
nothing.
Stupid.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but go on.
No, you're right. I mean, Nightshade is already the thinnest character personality-wise, and the only change they make to her character here is to make her emotionless. Like, it's the weirdest thing because you can't do anything with that narratively. Like, she barely interacts with the other characters, and then when she reunites with Captain Atom at the end, it's not like a big tearful reunion. It's almost like, oh, hey, do you remember we were kind of an item in the 60s? I do, and I feel like I should acknowledge that. Like,
they were an item during the Janus Directive.
Okay.
Well,
okay.
And also, Nightshade was very fleshed out in Suicide Squad. You know, she was a member for a while. They did a 4-issue arc that was all about her trying to find her brother, because she wasn't a criminal. She was on the Suicide Squad. That was the deal. She would join the Suicide Squad and be their teleportation, but they had to help her find her brother. It turns out her brother is gone, batshit crazy and has made a total heel turn. So it was also weird to see them be like, hey, this character that we predicated upon, like, having a lot of emotions, both like internally because of the trauma that would be associated with holding a demon, but also like the shit that happened with her brother and her dad and that kind of thing. Let's get rid of all that. What if she didn't feel anything? What if the only lady who feels anything in this is just feeling Sarge Steel's dick?
Let me quote from that panel. Okay. Sarge Steel and Justine. Things are starting to get kind of hot and heavy between them a little bit.
Meow.
She has him in a hallway, I assume, or maybe in front of her room. I don't know. So she's checking out his hand. She's like looking his hand over. Wow, it's an EF7365. I've heard about these, but I've never seen one until now. It's said that they have full tactile capabilities. Well, I can feel with it if that's what you mean. Really? Tell me, how does this feel to you? Now, folks, this is a silhouetted. You cannot see details. You have no idea where she's putting that hand.
It's Comics Code approved.
You have no idea where she's putting that hand. It is left up to your imagination. And he says, like something I haven't felt in a very long time.
You know what's weird, though? It's like he punched that demon with his metal hand and it got slagged up, right?
Right.
Like it just kind of melted or what the fuck ever. And so like he has to go get the new hand put on, but there was like a piece of it left, right? And they don't show you how that comes off. And I wonder if the guy from the Carnage concert with that big knife was there, like he could use that knife to cut it off. Was he the one who did it? That's the question. I don't know. Actually, the question is Big Sage, but I have a different question about that because that's a knife. He would know how to do it.
You got it in there, Dean. You got it in there. Much like Sarge Steel did. He got it in there too. You guys have a lot of respect for the Charlton heroes. Do I know much about them going into this? I don't. See your guys' expectation of what's supposed to happen in this book with these characters finally reuniting. I'm like, oh, hey, look, it's the Question. Oh, look, it's Blue Beetle.
I would like to say that out of the three of us, Dean is the Charlton fan.
Okay, all right.
I am more cautiously curious about these, for lack of a better term, off-brand characters. But I have nostalgia for a lot of truly, objectively terrible things. The Charlton action heroes are not
one of them. Okay.
No,
I don't think you would call the stuff that came out in the 60s terrible. I think it's good, especially for the time. You're talking about Dick Giordano as editor in his prime. Steve Ditko's doing a bunch of this stuff. It's probably Joe Gill's best work. Pat Boyette, great work on the Peacemaker. And then, we'll talk about Thunderbolt later, but Pat Morisi's Thunderbolt's really cool. Costume like the old school Daredevil, and he had the foresight to own the character. So, I don't think that stuff is bad. I do think that living assault weapons is objectively bad, and I think some bad things have been done with them since. But I think the original stuff is actually almost inarguably like the creative apex of Charlton. That having been said, that would make it like the 12th highest mountain in the United States, but a mountain nonetheless.
I haven't read the 60s stuff, so you are absolutely 100% correct. I am not forming an opinion on that. I also agree that I like the fact that someone is trying to do something with these characters, because when we did our Ultraverse episode and even our Valiant episode, I had said it both times. I almost wished DC would have bought those companies, because it would have been really nice to see some of those characters be integrated into the larger DC canon. One of the things DC does really well is it shepherds these other continuities into themselves. I am currently getting a Wildcats book because of that, and I certainly wouldn't if Marvel had bought Wildstorm. So no, I'm agreeing with you. I don't have that gut level reaction. Like even Watchmen, I love Watchmen the comic, but the individual characters are written almost to be like sad pastiches of these guys. So one thing I will say that we didn't mention before, I just want to throw out there, you mentioned that the question, a very violent vigilante, but based on an even more violent vigilante. Like one of the things that Ditko did after he left Marvel was he created the character of Mr. A, who is who is, to your point, 100%, what if objectivism was a person and wore a mask and decided to punish people. So the question is a really interesting take on that, because unlike the others who are, demonstrably superheroes, the question is pretty hardcore. He doesn't have a lot to do in the Law book, but a true Steve Ditko-esque question book wouldn't be all that different from Rorschach murdering the pedophile. So that's always been something that interests me.
And I think for a lot of people these days, like my little sister, who is like 9 years younger than me, she likes the question because she saw him in Justice League Unlimited. And I think for a lot of people, that's the question. That's how the question is, which is honestly a great take on the question that probably amalgamates the Ditko objectivism with the Zen liberalism of the Denny O'Neil stuff in a way that I didn't think was possible until like the magic guy, the late Dwayne McDuffie himself, like somehow made that work. To where like you kind of feel like he's got that crazy objectivist, weird right-wing conspiracy thing, but he also has like the heart of the Denny O'Neil character, who was very much into like helping people and learning more about himself. That's the question. You're right. Mr. A is a much more hardcore question. Rorschach arguably more hardcore than both of them.
I love JLU. I'm with you 100%. Jeffrey Combs doing the voice acting. But the thing I love most about that show is they are sitting around and they're like, hey, we need the question to talk to someone. Who should we bring on? Oh, I know, the Huntress. Has he ever interacted with the Huntress before? No, not that we know of. Why? Well, we're gonna have them date. Is that weird? No. Go with it. Let's see what happens. And an entire generation thinks that, the Huntress and the question are a great couple, which, again, if you're like super geeks like us, you think that's a little weird, but the show made it work. And
I honestly, that's headcanon for me now.
Oh, without a doubt.
I mean, like the question and the Huntress are just together, and also like another ship that cartoon sailed that I never thought about but really worked is the Batman Wonder Woman pairing. I'm like, you know what? Yeah, she probably would really like Batman. She admires that kind of thing. And of course, he wants a woman to beat him up. So here you go.
Credit where credit is due. I will never pass up an opportunity to mention him. Joe Kelly in the Obsidian Age. That's the first time that was mentioned, and that predates JLU. I'm just putting it out there. Jesse, you can edit that out if you want.
You said that like you said a hot take, like you.
Yeah, I'm like, what's the controversy here?
Because not like your PIN number.
Every single time I mention Joe Kelly or credit something to the Obsidian Age, a story where I feel like only I have read, I get blank stares. So I didn't want to kill them momentum.
I have heard of it, but I haven't read it. I have read it and forgotten about it. That's not impossible.
It is my favorite Justice League story of all time. I actually like it more than Rock of Ages or the Fifth Dimensional War or any of that stuff. I couldn't tell you why, but every time I read it, I think every DC comic should be like this.
I wish that I knew what you thought about it.
We didn't get the greatest comic ever yet. So
I really feel like you're kind of Barry Windsor Smithing it here. You're kind of lukewarm about it.
Lukewarm? Oh, man. I really hope that people get these inside jokes. And unfortunately, if you don't, we don't care. All right. It all started with the guy from Madison Square Garden with the knife.
If we ever have a Patreon and someone becomes a patron, Dean will call you and just scream at you through the phone.
What do you want me to scream about? Baseball or comic books?
This is not Cameo, but it'll be something.
Yeah.
Darry, I want to ask you, what do you think of our villain here, Avatar?
I actually really enjoyed the villain for a couple of reasons. One, I love the premise of I have failed my sidekick and now they're back for revenge. I mentioned this to you guys before we started recording. One of my favorite superhero movies of all time is The Incredibles, which has a very similar premise. And I love this idea of, a kid's sidekick, someone who looked up to you, someone who you were supposed to mold as a hero and as a mentor. it doesn't work, and they come back later, and they come back, far more dangerous than you expected. But also, this villain, this antagonist for Law, passes a very simple test. You can kind of see where they're coming from, like not with the death and destruction and everything else, but what does Avatar really want? Well, they want to end war, because when they were a kid, war ruined their life. It took everything from them, and it continued to be a presence as they entered adulthood. Like, on paper, that's not a bad thing. Like, I want to end war, I want to end violence. Unfortunately, they want to do that by unleashing demons upon the world and killing soldiers. So, not a great way of going about it. But, it's very similar to like Thanos in the MCU, where it's like, no, you don't want to kill every other person, but you understand the intent, if not the methodology, at least. So I actually really...
Why didn't he just triple everything?
Yeah, again, I'm not saying it was the right thing.
That's my question for him. I'm like, I get it more in the Marvel universe where he like worships death.
Yeah.
But like here it's like, I got to kill half the people because there's not enough. I'm like, well, you're God. Just make more.
It's nonsense, but what I'm saying is you can at least understand the idea, right? Like, this person thinks they're the hero because regardless of the nonsense way they want to go about it, they want to save everyone. They're not waking up in the morning and saying, I want to murder everyone because I'm evil. They're saying it because from their perspective, they're the hero. And it's very similar here. Avatar may have a legion of demons, but they're thinking to themselves, well, if I accomplish this, there will be no more war. The world will be at peace. And, very similar to Batman, Tiger is telling himself, no one will have to go through what I went through as a child. That kind of makes sense. And it's funny too, because, one of the MacGuffins, for lack of a better term, in this story is that there is a space station named Gort. And for those of you who don't know, Gort is the alien robot from the classic science fiction movie, The Day the Earth Stood Still. So I don't know why he chose that name, but I thought it was a very good choice, because it serves the same purpose as the robot did in the movie, which is a deterrent. There's this big space station that's drawn to be comically large, that's armed to the teeth, and is about to take over communications for the entire planet. And it's one of these things where it's like, well, yeah, that's a representation of war. It's basically the weaponized satellite from 2001: A Space Odyssey. So, you kind of see where Avatar's coming from. He also doesn't hurt children, which I liked. I like the ending where he's like, oh no, I wasn't going to hurt any of the kids. In fact, they can go back with you. You deal with this. I'm not putting anyone through what I went through. So I did like that. For a series full of lackluster stuff that never really gets its footing, the evolution of Tiger into Avatar I thought was very well done. And honestly, it was an interesting hero. You don't see many South Asian or Indian supervillains of a high caliber. So I honestly hope this character comes back one day.
Yeah, that was really another thing that, I don't mean this in a bad way, but it took away from the book for me, because here he is telling you what he's going to do and why he's going to do it. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, all right, where's the lie? And honestly, even when he went and killed soldiers, he told them they could all leave. He didn't have, he gave them a chance to retreat. Right. So, what's he doing that's terrible? You can argue he's just doing what the goddamn Justice League should be doing. Now, here's the difference, is they believe in a lot of social and political constructs that may or may not be real and or important as far as achieving goals, but we have made them very real and important as far as our day-to-day existence. Avatar has evolved past that. Like, that doesn't matter. We could argue about whether that's important or not, or whether this would solve problems or not, but I do think his philosophy is correct, and I do think he goes about it in a much more moral manner than he gets painted, for, by these guys, like, oh, we gotta stop him. Right. I mean, other than kidnapping the Justice League, why?
Now, they didn't know this going into it, but as things are revealed, this character, Tiger, has been the reason why he's come to such powers. He's drinking this thing called the Soma, I think is what it's called. Yeah. And that apparently, he is even telling Judomaster that this will drive people mad. Now, it's not happening right now. He seems like he's got a pretty good handle on things, but he's definitely has the potential to become unhinged, and he's pretty powerful. So, but yeah, I agree with you. Like, he's going about this an awful strange way to be a villain. You know,
Well, I mean, will it drive him mad? I don't know. People say LSD will drive you mad. I'm taking like 300 hits of LSD in my life or so. All right. And like, you know what it did? It calmed me down and made me a better person. It really put me in touch with things. It put me in touch with things in a way and made me realize a lot of things were connected in ways I hadn't thought of. And I became a much more moral person. I'm not saying it made me perfect or anything, but it was an important part of the development of me, and it caused me to believe a lot of things that I've talked to you all about, I've talked on here about, which when we break them down seem incredibly sane. But when you talk about trying to apply them to society, they'll call you mad. So like, I mean, are they just calling him, is this just like because he's gotten past these constructs and he's like, the only way to keep everyone safe is to destroy all the weapons? Like, has he, is that mad? Is that mad? Right. Or he has the power to do it, so he should, again, I don't know that this wouldn't just cause more problems or like this is actually the answer, but I know his reasoning is sound, and I know that we've never tried not having big militaries, so maybe it should be tried. Maybe you can keep the Justice League around as a counterbalance. You know what I mean? Also, that's the other thing about this comic, too. Where's everybody else if this is such a big deal? Where's the Titans? Where's Young Justice? Where's the Outsiders? Where's the Doom Patrol? Where's the Global Guardians and the Hero Hotline? Where are these people?
Can we all agree that Dick Giordano and Bob Layton hadn't read a comic that featured any of the action heroes in between Crisis on Infinite Earths and now? Because everything we're pointing out, it's like, no, I have comics where Sarge Steel and Peacemaker hang out in the 80s. Blue Beetle and Captain Atom were Justice League members when there were dozens of members. Like, it's very obvious that all those stories are just being ignored because they want to follow up on what they were doing in the original continuity. I feel like that's the only way this story works.
That's kind of what I felt. I was like, oh, the band's getting back together, but really it's kind of like, well, do they know each other? Do they not know each other? This is like these guys getting together and they're kind of feeling each other out again and getting into a misadventure to try and solidify them as a team at some point.
Well, and that's the thing, and that may be a mistake, because they were never really a team in the old days either. Like Blue Beetle and the Question knew each other, and Blue Beetle and Captain Atom knew each other, and Captain Atom and Nightshade knew each other. But until like the 80s, actually, when a company called Americomics had the license, and they put them together as the Sentinels of Justice, they were not like all these Charlton guys were on a team. That did not happen. That wasn't a thing. In fact, like Judomaster's adventures took place during World War II, while like Peacemaker and Captain Atom and Blue Beetle would have been contemporary, in the 60s. So that may be part of the mistake. I don't necessarily want them to be a team, but I do. You want them to all be together, if that makes sense.
I do.
And you're promising to bring them together, and they do have this. They have this meta connection that we all know about. So you want to see them fight together, even if it doesn't wind up with them becoming, the Justice Battalion who gets fucking aced in Kingdom Come.
I was just gonna say, was that a Kingdom Come reference? That made my entire night. For those of you who don't know, Mark Waid and Alex Ross bring the action heroes back in Kingdom Come, and then the same exact thing happens. Captain Atom, in this costume from 3 years earlier, gets taken out early in the fight, so they don't have to explain why he isn't involved later on. And then the rest of them are just kind of peter out. But yeah, the Justice Battalion.
And then he blows up.
Yeah, causing worldwide famine.
Because that's usually, listen, Captain Adams, there are only two Captain Adams stories. The one where he gets incapacitated and can't do shit for shit.
the one where he destroys everything.
There's a third one, which happened in Invasion, where he gets to be the soldier guy in charge of superheroes. But that's it. Those are the three Captain Adams stories as far as I know.
Nice. 4 through 6. Bear with me here. I wrote a lot here for some reason, but here we go. Issue 4 gives us Judomaster and Tiger's story. Tiger was Judomaster's ward in World War II, but when Japan surrendered, Tiger's immigration to the U.S. continually falls through. The pair travel the world looking for a martial arts haven called Nanda Parbat. Pronouncing that incorrectly, I'm sure. However, Tiger grows tired of traveling with Judomaster and bitterly leaves him. Upset with the plight of children affected by the horrors of war, Tiger acquires some objects of immense supernatural power, giving him the ability to control the Ravenans and immortality, becoming Avatar. The only drawback is that it drives the owner mad. Unknown to Avatar, Judomaster is able to free himself. This is back in the present time. Judomaster is
impossible!
He's able to free himself, and the two fight until Tiger is actually killed. Judomaster rescues Captain Atom, who is in a liquid state. I think he puts him in a cup or something. I don't know. Who's in a liquid who's in a liquid state at this point, but then revives Tiger and leaves. Undeterred, Avatar contacts his mole at the U.S. government to control a large satellite to unleash an EMP to cripple the military. Aware of this, Blue Beetle, the Question, and Peacemaker head to space to stop it. Landing, the team has to avoid the satellite's defense mechanisms and is successful, but Blue Beetle suffers some serious injuries after being electrocuted, nearly sacrificing himself to stop the weapon. Nightshade, with the help of Martian Manhunter, finds the watchtower and frees the JLA. Victory well in hand, Judomaster reaches out to Avatar, appealing for him to release the children that were under his protection. Avatar agrees, but swears their war is not over. Concluding the story, Blue Beetle recovers and decides to shelve his passion for crime fighting as he has had a bit of catharsis during his adventure. Mitchell Black looks to leave the Peacemaker project, but is advised he is not allowed due to a past mistake. Captain Atom is able to reconstitute himself after some wise words from Judomaster. And the last words of Vic's piece before he hits delete. I'll read it straight from the comic. Cap had to face a crisis of confidence in order to discover who he truly was. The Blue Beetle, the Peacemaker, and the Judomaster saw the guilt of their past evolve into the thing that threatened their hopes for a future. And poor Nightshade had to lose her humanity in order to recognize its value. But what about the Question? The lesson I learned from the Avatar was that our pasts are always present. I learned that conflicts, no matter how small, can result in enormous tragedy when left unresolved. And most of all, I learned that when all else fails, friendships are the glue that holds our tenuous individual realities in place. The end. Judomaster looks to find Tiger and bring him to the light at some point, while Tiger is out looking for Nanda Parbat, the realm Judomaster was in before recently returning to Earth. So there you go.
Hey, don't forget, Sarge Steel is on a private jet with his hot girlfriend, who it turns out she's rich.
The whole thing or Question at the end is great because he didn't really do anything. He's got no superpowers. He happens to know the Blue Beetle, so he gets to go into space. You know, it's not like he did any detective work or really figured out what was going on, but he was present and he learned all this stuff. So he immediately starts writing it up. And then, you know, he very dramatically, presumably holds down the delete key for, I don't know, 20 minutes or so, because no one knows how keyboards work in 1999. Which actually is a trope I like because, and I know this is random, but they do something similar in the 2003 Daredevil movie where they have Ben Urich dramatically hold down the delete key to remove his storyline where he's going to unveil Daredevil's secret identity. I don't know who stole from who, but that's what that made me think of.
Save it and delete the file, bro.
Again, who knows? Who knows? They keep going back to the Peacemaker Institute, the PAX Institute or whatever it's called, and the governors who are both like random animatronic things that represent non-corporeal concepts, but also terrible stereotypes of what you would think delegates from different first world countries are. And they're constantly like talking about how, no, we need this thing and we need operatives and we need everything else. To go back to Dean's point, it's kind of like, yeah, Avatar's making a lot more sense here. Remind me again why we need guns, because I don't know about this.
Right.
You have the Peacemaker institution, and it's apparently more well funded than the UN because they can effortlessly launch space stations and everything else. But they also don't think anything of like blackmailing and press ganging a random doctor into becoming G.I. Joe. So the whole thing is very weird, and I don't know that it was intentional to make the villain's point of view a little bit more palpable, but that's certainly what I get towards the end. And the other thing that I really like is Judomaster, who is the character I knew the least about coming into this because he doesn't even have an analog in Watchmen. As far as I know, he's just a white person who's incredibly good at the martial art of judo. He kind of keeps pursuing this idea of, well, I'm going to bring you back. I'm going to redeem you. Like you did this thing and it was really, really bad, but it's kind of my fault. I need to bring you back. Like it's not enough to defeat you. It's not enough to lock you up. I have to make up for this. And I do like that. I like the idea that Judomaster hasn't given up on his ward, even if these characters are not necessarily going to be household names. I really did appreciate that aspect of the character because it seemed very consistent. And then finally, poor Nightshade. Like, oh my goodness, you know, you're the one who actually finds the Justice League. You're the only one with superpowers that seem to matter. You know, you have the ability to jump into the netherworld where the Ravenous are coming from. You have a lot of agency.
Shadow tornado.
You do things. I don't even know how to describe. Like, she seems to have different powers based on whatever the story calls for, but it's like it doesn't go anywhere. You know, I kind of wanted to see the character have a real moment at the end where she's like, oh, okay, great, this is what I'm going to be like going forward. But it's, you know, she's still emotionless and she's standing there with her random uncle, and it's kind of like, oh, no one's going to pick up on this. There's a later series that features these characters as part of the Multiversity. It's a single issue called Pax Americana. Nightshade, Eve Eden gets much more agency there, but still, you know, the least developed out of the six, and I feel like that's just unfortunately how the game is going to be played. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's a 6-issue miniseries, and you're told a story, and everything's wrapped up. But unfortunately, it's very forgettable. It's not a great way to close out the 90s.
I was kind of like on your side there, Darry, where you're like, I want to see Avatar come back. As we close this out, I think the most promise for me is like, okay, Avatar's still out there. At some point, he's going to show back up, and we'll get another story where these guys have to maybe come back together. Does that happen? Or are you guys aware of anything like that? Or does Avatar
No,
just
I don't think we
fuck
ever
right off?
hear. I think this is something that DC hopes that nobody ever talks about again, because it got, you know, it got over, you know, like a dead fish in a locker. You know what I mean? Like, no, it's not good.
The other thing to remember is these characters are not going to have a great time of it in the coming decade. You know, Dean mentioned before the Judomaster gets unceremoniously torn in half.
Yeah.
Ted Kord is murdered. Like a big part of that Infinite Crisis era is the idea that there's really just no place for a wisecracking, bug-themed superhero. And, you know, if you say that out loud, you might have a better understanding of why DC is constantly in crisis mode.
Especially when you consider, and no offense, because I love Jaime Reyes, like, we don't have room for a wisecracking bug-themed superhero. Let's replace him with another wisecracking bug-themed superhero, but he'll be younger and Latino, which I honestly think is good. I'm not complaining that they made him younger and Latino. That's you know, really good. I don't mind that, but like, your it's weird that that's your argument. We can't have Ted Kord because he's like X. We'll have Jaime Reyes because he's like X.
Yeah, Ted Kord has a rough go of it. He shows up in the book The Birds of Prey, and there's this running joke about how he has to wear a girdle because he's so out of shape. Because he's fat. Yeah,
and that starts in Justice League.
Oh, that starts in Justice League.
Yeah,
oh, okay.
Justice League, him and Booster Gold get out of shape at one point. Yeah, he's pretty much outside of his own title. He's pretty much a joke character until he dies. He's one of those characters, and I guess Speedball had a similar thing where nobody realized how much they liked him until they were gone or transmogrified.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. You know, you murder these seemingly innocent characters, and then everyone, you know, suddenly gets in arms over it, and it's the first time they thought about the character for a while. But
well, I think people had thought about him. I think the thing is like, I think a lot of times, and this is one of the reasons I have a hard time reading a lot of modern mainstream superhero comics, and it started around Infinite Crisis, is they're supposed to be fun, and Ted Kord's a fun guy, and Speedball's a fun guy. Everybody's not supposed to be Spawn and goddamn Punisher, you know, and like right. You know, Dark Wolverine, you know, when he's at his darker moments. There's supposed to be some fun characters. Daredevil doesn't have to be born again Daredevil. He can be the Carl Kessel Daredevil, which was like swashbuckling and fun. Like, it could be different. And I feel like around the time that they killed Ted Kord, DC especially was just trying to leech all of the fun out. If there's no fun, what's the point? I already live in this goddamn forsaken real world. I don't need something to not be fun.
Right. I want to escape.
Right. Which, again, doesn't mean there's not room for stuff that's a little more challenging or dark.
It's just, I just hopped onto the wiki to kind of see where our creators go after this. Well, I can tell you the big thing that happens on both Bob Layton and Dick Giordano's wiki, and that is in December of 2000, Layton launched Future Comics.
Right.
So are they, at that time, cutting ties with DC and not doing anything with them?
Well, Dick Giordano had been the editor of DC for a while. He had been freelancing for a while, and Bob Layton also had been freelancing. And Dick Giordano, like, he passes away within a decade.
2010.
Yeah, I was going to say around 10 years from now. So,
yeah. You know, the other thing that we didn't mention, but feel like I should, even if I don't want to. The actual meat of this story hinges on a character betraying the team, but it's, the villain is an Asian man who is dedicated to Indian philosophy, and the traitor in the Peacemaker Institute who betrays the law is the one sole Indian character who's in the.
Yeah.
It's very weird. It's like she's introduced early on. She has a very obvious name and appearance and everything else, and then halfway through, you think the traitor might be. I don't know, Justine or whomever Sarge is hooking up with, but it's not. You're shown very clearly to be this woman, and again, she's got a very relatable position of like, well, I need to save my son, and this god from my home said he could do it. So it's just one of these things of like,
it reeks of Orientalism, like I've talked about before. Like Edward Said wrote about. Here we're gonna, we're gonna put these things into a neat box, make them palatable for our primarily white audience, and then we're going to make them, they're the villains, they're the noble savage. That's the way it always is, etc. Yes. And I think that's what happened here. And and sadly, this was not a well-known concept. I think it's concept at the time. I think it's much more known. Like when they made the Iron Fist Netflix show, they're like, this is problematic for a few different reasons. I think it can be sorted out, but like it does have its issues on the surface. But I think this wasn't something that was considered at the time. I mean, Judomaster is really just Iron Fist number 0, in a lot of ways. I mean, and there's stuff before this that's even like the Shadow is like this to a certain extent. The Phantom even, I mean, but yeah, I think I think I agree with you. I felt like it was off-putting and reeked of Orientalism.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I wanted to bring this up, and you had mentioned Thunderbolt before. Judomaster is unfortunately part of a longer legacy, and the analog in Watchmen isn't Judomaster. It's Peter Cannon Thunderbolt, who DC does not own the rights to and didn't appear in this book and all this other stuff, though he did appear in an issue we'll talk about a little later. But my understanding is that Peter Cannon was based on an even earlier character, which was the Golden Age Daredevil.
Daredevil. Yeah. Not necessarily the character himself. I don't think their origins are similar, but the outfit for sure. And Pat Morrissey actually tried to buy the rights to the Golden Age Daredevil from Charles Biro, who's a fascinating guy if you ever get to read about him. Actually was one of the people who was like censured for being a communist and stuff, Really one of the reasons that Wortham and those guys really went after comic books at the time, published the crime comics that were just sordid. They're delicious, to be honest. But he wanted to buy that. They balked, and so he just kind of made the outfit different. I don't know the Golden Age Daredevil's origin, though, but so it could be similar, but I don't think so. I think he was just like a guy who was a big gymnast. You probably seen him in the Savage Dragon, though, because he brought in a bunch of public domain characters. That one, Captain Tootsie, I remember, which is really funny. The Tootsie Roll Shazam-esque guy.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if he had a similar origin, because I know that Marvel's Iron Fist is vaguely based on a Golden Age character named Amazing Man, who also, I believe, has a similar...
And Amazing Man's in the Protectors and stuff.
Yes, exactly.
Centaur character.
Yeah. So it's all connected. It all goes back to this weird idea of if you go far enough east, you could out magic the people who have lived there for millennia.
Doctor Strange, even, to be honest.
Yeah, no, Doctor Strange. Though I will say I read a very interesting article. I forget where, and I apologize, or else I would credit it, that there is a theory that if you look at the first couple of issues of Doctor Strange, it is obvious that Steve Ditko meant for Stephen Strange to be of Asian descent, based on the way he...
You know what? That is true when you look at those early issues.
Yeah, and again, I've never met Steve Ditko. I'm not speaking as an expert. I'm just saying I believe if you look at the first couple of issues, it is predominantly Asian characters in the origin stories. They're drawn the same way as Stephen Strange. So I don't think Ditko intended for him to necessarily be a white person. I don't know how much of that was added later. But again, that's just me defending Marvel.
So Golden Age Daredevil apparently has 2 origins. One where his parents get killed and he becomes a mute. He gets a boomerang-shaped scar. The murderer branded him with a boomerang-shaped scar, and so the traumatic experience left him mute. He trained in the boomerang, not so traumatic that he wouldn't, get really good at it. and then he became Daredevil. His other one is that apparently he was able to speak. His parents were killed while they were in Australia. So Bart was raised by a tribe of Aborigines who taught him how to throw the boomerang. Then he came back to America and became Daredevil. You know, you pick your poison because they're both pretty fucking awful. Listen, if I'm going to pick one, it's the Aborigines thing.
Yeah,
because I just want to, I can just see this guy like throwing a boomerang at a kangaroo. I like the imagery.
Love it.
Oh man.
All right.
So no, they don't have the same origin.
Any other notes here on our 6 issues of Law, Living Assault Weapons?
Do we ever know why they're called that? Characters
start saying it.
You start saying it, right?
Yeah.
A couple of things that I have. Number one, wow, why isn't this a 5-issue series? Because goddamn, everything, all the crises are like solved in issue 5. There's no punching or fighting in issue 6. It's just a Judomaster talking nicely to Captain Atom while the question hangs out.
You needed that scene where Justine says, well, I'm also wealthy. I'm not only gorgeous and interested in random old men who were probably pretty mean to me.
A girl can't be fucking rich, dude. What? Welcome to the 90s. How many times is that said in here? Like, you know, 13, it's 1999, right? Dude. You've had 9 years to get used to the 90s.
Years. I was thinking the same thing. Half of this fucking comic takes place in the 2000s.
When you said the thing about the fiction suit, that's all I could think of, because I don't know anything about Bob Layton or Dick Giordano, but Sarge Steel is he's just like, it's just a Mary Sue. It's just, he shows up, he's tougher than everyone, you know, he's fought but he fought super villains and Nazis and all this other nonsense, and then the most gorgeous woman in the world is throwing himself, you know, it's just like he's the one who gets, I won't even say an arc, like halfway through he's mind controlled just to give him something to do for the issue, but even that
also so he can snap at her.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So they can have what's supposed to pass as, you know, what's supposed to convince us is some kind of relationship conflict.
Yeah.
Don't forget the part where she says his dick works, by the way.
Oh man!
They say it nicer because this is Comics Code approved.
It is.
These 6 issues are so tame, even by the standards of 1999, where like you know things were getting a bit rowdier. But these are tame comics. Yeah, these are very much Comics Code approved. Everything is innuendo at best. Again, that line about Plastic Man where he's making fun of Blue Beetle, I thought that was a dirty joke. And then they continue to talk about carpal tunnel syndrome. And it's like, oh no, you're really just like making fun of him for being a nerd. Like that is really what the punchline is here. And it was just so awkward. It was just like, did no one read this thing before it went to the printer?
I think the idea was maybe that they're like, okay, we're going to write this for like 12, 13, 14-year-olds, which they're like into those kind of jokes to an extent. But the thing about 12, 13, 14-year-old young men is they like to pretend they're more sophisticated than they are. You either have to like make a much more clever joke than they did, or just straight out be like, yeah, Blue Beetle jacks off, because, hit them over the head with it because they also like that. But like when they're not, because that seems mature somehow, you know what I mean? Like, oh yeah, that would be on Cinemax, or some bullshit. But like, you can't do this stuff where it's, it's just this shitty innuendo, although it is riotous in the most awful way. The other thing I wanted to point out was, and I sent you guys a picture of this, the robots that are guarding the satellite are just the robots from Chopping Mall. I sent a picture of like the robot from Chopping Mall right next to them. They're the same. They're on these tracks. They're like, oh my God, it's pretty much just, straight up, which reminds me of the story. One time when I first met my girlfriend, Emily, she and I were talking about, slasher movies we had seen. And I was like telling her about Chopping Mall. And she's like, no, I've seen that movie. I think you're talking about Killbots. And I was like, no, I'm talking about Chopping Mall. She's like, well, I've seen a movie that's a lot like that. So I looked it up. Chopping Mall was originally called Killbots. They released it. It didn't do very well. They're like, oh, let's re-release it, but let's jazz it up. A janitor told them to call it Chopping Mall, and they put it out. It was a big hit. Make that guy the CEO, motherfucker. Like he's driving the sacks. But anyhow, when I saw them, that's immediately what I thought. I was like, those are just the robots from Chopping Mall.
That's hilarious. Yep, there they are. Looking at it right now.
The tracks are the same. The build's the same. They both shoot lasers.
Yep.
You know, like it's just that's all. Also, the only thing I really appreciate they tried to do this year. They gave Blue Beetle a bit of a little backstory, but again, it's like you said, they had never read any comic book that had happened between like the 60s and now because he'd already dealt with all that shit. Yeah. All that stuff had already been dealt with, you know, and so so it was good that they tried. And I'm a fan of the Dan Garrett Scarab Blue Beetle, and I like that like it sometimes gets brought back that Scarab is now like a, you know, it's a MacGuffin in the DC universe that like, I think it gets connected to Jaime Reyes at some point, and I think there was also like a loosely related story. Vertigo series called Scarab that was like loosely related to it. Could be wrong about that. I've heard that. I never read it, so take that for what it's worth, which is like minus $30. So I did like that they tried to get that going because I'm a mark for that stuff, but I don't think it worked, but I'm glad they tried. I think the Peacemaker thing is a bad story, especially considering that they keep being like, he did it wrong as a doctor. And then you look at it and you're supposed to feel bad for him, but yeah, he operated on a kid without their parents' permission, and the kid died.
Yeah.
Why am I supposed to feel bad for him? It's like they won't let him be a doctor anymore. Sounds like they fucking shouldn't. Like, apparently the kid was going to die anyway, but like you did this and then he died. So it looks like, like that's, even if it had nothing to do with what you did, that's a bad look. That's why doctors have to get consent. Why am I supposed to feel sorry for this guy whose actions arguably wound up killing a kid who he did without consent? Also, how does that happen? Did he kidnap this kid to do this fucking surgery? Like, right. Oh, hold on, I want to talk to your son for 7 hours. What, in 3 days if it goes bad? How does that even work? I thought that was a weird take. One of the, I did like that they showed the question with bruises, because a lot of times you don't see those normal guys get beaten up, and he's like, gosh, and he had that mask on a long time, so probably some of it was just stuck to his face, but some of it was, he had a black eye, he got the shit kicked out of him. So I do like when the so-called human heroes show those kind of weaknesses, because let's be honest, everybody who is a so-called non-powered superhero in these universes would have superpowers in ours, as evidenced by the fact that those guys just go into space. You can't just go into space. Like, astronauts train for like 900 hours and go in that spinny thing so they can start to handle the G-force and stuff. The question, where's his hat and tie? You know what I mean? That's it. Like, so I just want to say this is more proof that you say something like Batman or Green Arrow, they don't have, or Nightwing don't have superpowers. They absolutely do. You could not do that in the real world.
Blue Beetle hangs things up. How long does he hang things up for here? I mean, says
20 minutes, because
like 3 days.
He's in they have that JLA spinoff, and he's in formerly known as the Justice League pretty quickly. And this was 2000, and like Infinite Crisis is 2005, and when he gets popped, he's been active for a bit. So that's probably
one of the biggest things that I took out of this. At the end of this, Blue Beetle's like, I'm worked through my shit now. I need to, I'm just going to hang things up for a little bit. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty a big deal.
That was your own dumb fault, because nothing in this comic book was a big deal.
Yeah.
To the point where the Justice League shows up and saves the day in a comic book that is not theirs in the penultimate issue. Not even the ultimate issue.
Yeah, right. Our last issue, our last issue is pretty much an epilogue.
It's a big shit pot full of nothing. Nothing happened.
Law.
I can't believe that no one screamed that they were, in fact, the Law in 6 issues. That's all I wanted. Was someone, maybe Peacemaker, to just channel Judge Dredd, to give me some self-awareness of the nonsense going on here. But no, everyone played it straight.
Let's get into Justice League Quarterly number 14.
Really, it's about the cover. I mean, you cover.
I was going to say, if this thing had come out a few years later, I absolutely would have bought it after just seeing the cover, because you cannot go wrong with a Mike Mignola cover, and this thing is gorgeous. I mean, this was right around when he was starting Hellboy. You can tell with the way the shoulders and the blacks are used, like he's about to enter his golden age. I mean, this cover is gorgeous. Really.
Yeah, and I mean, he's about to enter his golden age, and think about what he's already done, like Cosmic Odyssey and his the X-Force stuff and that kind of thing. He's already
Gotham by Gaslight.
By Gaslight. There you go.
He's no slouch, but I mean, Hellboy is Hellboy. So.
Oh yeah, for sure. He's he's about to have a rocket strapped to him, but he was already on top of a mountain.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed completely. Yeah.
So this is Justice League Quarterly number 14. Came out in the spring. Yeah, I got spring of 1994. So we're doing things a little bit backwards here, but that's okay because this story feels definitely kind of standalone. The story that we're getting into, we're just focusing on one story, and that is Havoc Unleashed, written by Paul Kupperberg, Michael Collins on pencils, Eduardo Barreto on inks, Bob Pinaha, letterer, and Gene D'Angelo, colorist. So again, this takes place before the events of Law. Specifically, what the big difference here is that Nightshade is actually, prior to being stripped of her emotions. But we do have a couple new characters here. And Dean, feel free here. I want to do my best to kind of lay out here Thunderbolt, who debuted in Peter Cannon Thunderbolt #1 from January of '66, part of Charlton's editors Dick Giordano's Action Heroes superhero line. I'm going to read this. This was straight from, I think, the inside. This was on the wiki, but this is like the description on the inside of the comic of who Thunderbolt is. So Peter Cannon, orphan son of an American medical team, was raised in a Himalayan lamasery where his parents had sacrificed their lives combating the dreaded Black Plague. After attaining the highest degree of mental and physical perfection, he was entrusted with the knowledge of the ancient scrolls that bore the secret writings of past generations of wise men. From them, he learned concentration, mind over matter, the art of activating and then harnessing the unused portions of the brain that made seemingly fantastic feats possible. Then he returned to America with his faithful friend Taboo, which I don't think shows up here, and sought out a new life in a new land that required the emergence of Peter Cannon Thunderbolt.
First of all, like we talked about earlier, Pat Morrissey owned the trademark and copyright to it. It is still owned by the Morrissey estate to this day. Thunderbolt was licensed to DC Comics around this time. It actually had like a 12-issue series. It was an ongoing, but it only made it 12 issues. Mike Collins was the writer and penciler on that series, and Paul Kupperberg was the editor. So these guys, it's been a while since I've read that series. I do like it. We should cover it sometime. It's very fun, straightforward, quirky. But I think this is tying up a couple loose ends from that. And Justice League Quarterly, it came out every 3 months. There was a place where they could do that because, it's an anthology book. So you can, and Peter Cannon had been involved with the Justice League Europe a few times. So it was a way to do that while they still had the license. I love Justice League Quarterly and Green Lantern Quarterly growing up because, number one, they were just big, thick books. And you didn't get many comic books when you're a kid. You had to pick and stuff. And so, when it came time for me to choose which ones to steal, these would always be at the top of my list because, it's a big, thick book. I'll get a lot of enjoyment out of that. And you would learn about characters that couldn't show up anywhere else. Like, here's Nort. Here's some Alan Scott stories in Green Lantern Quarterly. Justice League Quarterly, you're going to get some Global Guardians. You're going to get, these Charlton guys. They didn't really have room for in the mainstream books. So, for me, these were both big books. But yeah, back to Thunderbolt. Again, very similar story to Judomaster and Iron Fist. Probably that part of it hasn't aged well, but I think they do a pretty good job. I think Mike Collins does a good job of rectifying some of that with his series. And then later on, when Dynamite works with the character, I think they also do a good job, getting away from the Orientalist feel that it has. But I love Thunderbolt. Looks cool. Like we talked about, based on the Daredevil, the Golden Age Daredevil costume, great character, great talent. Pat Morrissey, and this is the last fact I have for you, he was a cop for the the NYPD, and you weren't supposed to moonlight, so he signed his stuff Pam, which is like his initials, because he was worried someone on the force would somehow see it or know somehow, which is really funny. Can you just imagine he walks into that sergeant where they have the you walk into the headquarters, it's behind that glass of that desk, and he's just reading Thunderbolt and looks up and Pete. I said Pat, but it's Pete Morrissey. I'm getting confused with Pat Boyette, who created Peace.
Gotcha. The next character that I have listed here shows up for a very quick second in this issue and also in this universe. That is our new Judomaster, which I don't even think we have an actual name. This is his first appearance in this issue, created by Paul Kupperberg and Mike Collins. 2 total appearances for this character in the DC universe, and that is this issue and a Guy Gardner Warrior Volume 1, number 29.
Is that the one with the bar?
I think it's a cameo, from what I understand. So,
just like I think that's the one where Guy opens Warriors, like the bar, and like there's just a bunch of guys in there. It's a superhero bar.
This new Judomaster has come along and picked up the moniker of Judomaster. We also have Andreas Havoc. Nothing out there on this guy.
He is a bad guy from the 12 issues of Thunderbolt. The Baron Mordo of the Thunderbolt mythos, if you will.
I got it. Yeah.
Like he thought he should be the one, and then he wasn't, so he just stole the scrolls anyway. And I believe he goes mad somehow, and now he's in Central Park doing bad guy stuff.
Yeah, he is. All right, well, there you go. That's kind of, and then we have our main characters here. We got Adam. We have, the Atom, not Captain the Atom. Captain Atom. My goodness, it has broke us, Darry.
You just love Ray Palmer. It's okay.
Blue Beetle, Eve Eden, Nightshade, Thunderbolt, and Captain Atom are also in this book. So here we go. I've got the synopsis ready to go. I don't want to start without giving you guys the opportunity. Is there anything I forgot or you guys need to talk about before I jump into that? All right, here we go.
The one thing I would say is, honestly, the neatest part for me of this was the Peacemaker reference, where the general almost shoots somebody with his pistol. And I was like, because he says he goes with my cult Peacemaker, which is kind of a, it's a, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, Peacemaker is one of the Charlton guys. So I guess he sort of makes an appearance. I also looked at the gun itself, because I'm a gun mark, and I was like, I hope that, I bet they got it wrong. I bet they use a Colt 45, the automatic, but no, it is correct. It is a revolver. It was the right gun. And it, and it just reminds me of the Steve Earle song, Devil's Right Hand, where he's just like, first pistol I bought was a Colt 45. They called it a Peacemaker, but I never knew why. So it was good stuff. That was a good little part that, it's kind of a meta thing to the story. And the end where they're all like, I feel like we've all been together before. Ha ha. No. That's a really nice way to, wrap it up.
Right. So we open this story outside a Tibetan monastery where a madman named Andreas Havoc has sprung free and now plots revenge on the hero Thunderbolt. 3 days later, a dome in the middle of Central Park appears where a figure claims Vajra has returned, demanding Thunderbolt be brought there. Sergeant Steel notifies Captain Atom and also tells him Nightshade and Blue Beetle are going to lend a hand. It turns out Andreas Havoc is upset because he feels he is the reincarnation of a mystical being called Vajra, and Thunderbolt stole that from him. As all of the team arrive, they make their way into the dome. After dealing with some summoned monsters, the team tries to track down Havoc. When they finally do, Havoc unleashes a spell that traps him in a horrific nightmare world. Outside the dome, a new Judomaster makes his way in, attacking Havoc and drawing his attention away from the rest of the team, allowing the others to free themselves. Nightshade is able to trap Havoc in one of her warps, defeating him. And at the end of the issue, the team reflects on how well they work together. There you go. Justice League Quarterly, Havoc Unleashed.
Dean mentioned this, but I really, really like the scene at the end where they're all standing around and they're looking at each other and they're like, we seem to have some sort of connection. This whole story hints at the fact that in some other life they were all friends or superheroes who may have run into each other, as opposed to in Law where it's like, oh no, you are immediately the only superhero team who can save the Justice League and thus the world. So I liked here with the more winking and nodding, more of a...
It's kind of a Grant Morrison Animal Man.
Yeah. I
Not as serious as that, but like it kind of had that feel.
Yeah, it's less from a place of, no, this actually happened, and more of a, hey, yeah, if you read those, great, we're all back together. If not, and you want to see more of us, please write to DC Comics. But I agree with you guys. I did not read Quarterly when it was coming out, but I love going through these stories and seeing either things that were otherwise put into a drawer or stories that never got a chance to complete. I know if I had been reading Thunderbolt at the time and this story had come out to kind of wrap things up, I would have really appreciated that. I know I still do today when, last issues get published in annuals or whatever the equivalent of Marvel Comics Presents is today. So I thought that was really cool. And actually, I read the other stories in this issue, and while I understand while we are not covering them, I do like the opportunity to do one-offs of people who wouldn't have been able to carry their own books. So I think Quarterly's a pretty solid title.
Dean, you talked about this being a perfectly acceptable comic book story.
Yeah.
I jump into this thing, and I mean, I feel the beats of that. Okay, hey, we got a threat. Gather the team. Let's go take care of business. Oh no, the evildoers got the upper hand. Thank goodness there's an element that he wasn't expecting, and boom, we're victorious.
No, thank God there were sewers for Thunderbolt 2 to climb through.
I remember starting this out. I had to read it a couple times because I was a little lost. I didn't know who these characters were. I didn't know, aside from what I had already read in Law, but I didn't know the villain. The villain was definitely weird and whacked out. Thunderbolt, I didn't even know existed until I read this. That's kind of how new I was when I was reading this issue. Didn't know anything about Thunderbolt being a superhero. I was having a hard time following the villain. Like, dude was created a dome, and there's this big dude at the top of it hanging out saying, bring so-and-so to me, I'm the Vajra, blah, blah, blah. And, it took me a couple times to read it and finally figure out what was going on. But yeah, as far as like superhero stories go, yeah, it was there. It was perfectly acceptable. The guys got together and they took care of business. Dean, do you think, seeing these Charlton heroes on the front cover, that's going to pop? Was that the selling point? Obviously, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's if you weren't already buying Justice League Quarterly, that was your best reason to buy this. I mean, unless you knew who was going to be in it. I can't remember the other stories, but perhaps there were characters that you wanted to see more of. Like I remember in one issue, like Fire and O'Baron and Ice and Guy Gardner go on a double date. It's a fun story, like you have that kind of thing, in this title. So, I mean, I think that like the Mignola cover is probably worth the price of admission alone, especially now. You're going to find this in like a buck bin.
Yeah.
You're going to find, so, it might not have been worth $3.50 at the time, which I think is what the cover price was. But, it's certainly worth $1 now. I think you're right. It probably didn't come together very well. Like I also knew that like when Thunderbolt's having his nightmare vision, because Havoc is controlling him, there's a lady that he's talking to, and that lady was his girlfriend in the title, in his own title. But it turns out she was like he was trying to fight this crime agency or this, crime syndicate. And turns out she was in charge of it. So like I knew that. So that makes it, more important to me. But if you didn't, they didn't really get that across. I'm not saying it was perfect, but I am saying that, like I said, if you knew these characters and you like, Blue Beetle or Captain Atom or Thunderbolt, or Nightshade, this was fine for you. I don't know if there was much if you liked Judomaster or Judomaster 2, but nobody likes Judomaster 2 because you didn't do anything else.
Right.
You have to know about him to dislike him.
Nobody liked them that read them, and nobody liked them that wrote them either, because they obviously decided not to do it anymore. They just that guy.
I don't know what happens to their careers from here, but I think Mike Collins has a lot of other things going on. I think he did start doing stuff closer to home because he's British, and I don't think Paul Kupperberg's an editor much longer. Right? 5 more years or something. So maybe that's part of it. Maybe they were like, well, that didn't work, so let's not bring it up anymore. Another thing is where you put him. What are you going to do? Put him in another JLQ? This was only like tangentially related to the Justice League already.
Yeah, and again, kind of like what you were saying, is we got to work our shit. We got to get our shit in.
Right.
Judomaster is the shit. The cult Peacemaker, the Peacemaker is the shit. We got to get that shit into this issue somehow. Got to get it in.
I've never read the Thunderbolt series, so I did enjoy this story. I thought it brought you up to speed quite nicely if you hadn't read it. But, ultimately it really is an issue of an ongoing book. But like I said, it tees up Law very nicely, even if it couldn't necessarily have anticipated that book. The other thing I'll say about this one in particular is I really like the art. It's very much...
Yeah, I was going to say that too. Mike Collins is a great penciler, and he's very overlooked.
It's very much of its time, but it's dynamic. The characters very much look like superheroes. Everyone's doing something. They're constantly in motion. So I enjoyed it for that. I thought everyone had pretty good design work too. So definitely my favorite art of what we read for tonight.
Who's got
also noticed that Sarge Steel talks like a person and not like gumshoe spy caricature in this.
Right.
He's so over the top. Have you guys ever read Frank Miller's Hard Boiled?
No, I've
No,
heard
but
of it, but I've never read it.
So
Yeah.
basically, the gimmick there, I mean, we may want to cover it one day, but the gimmick there is it's a person who's programmed to talk like that. And that's all I could think of with Sarge Steel. I'm like, you're so over the top. Are we going to find out that you're a Cord Industries animatronic or something to that effect? But again, Law never gets to that level of self-awareness. He really does play it straight and gets to go off with the gorgeous, wealthy, incredibly horny redhead at the end of the book. So
Let me ask Jesse a question.
Ask
Does
me.
Sarge Steele's like metal hand qualify him to be in Cyberforce?
That answer is yes, sir.
All right,
That answer is yes.
Steel. Hell yeah.
Steel.
He was actually the sergeant that Stryker was talking to in Mars Attacks Image. That's why they got along, because I was like, why would they get along? He's like, that's why. He was just
They've got a history. I mean,
they're like,
look.
they do the fucking
Oh,
Predator
dude.
like handshake.
Oh,
yes.
Like, like,
Yes.
with their metal hands.
Yes, they do.
oh my gosh. All right. Darry, tell me what costume do you like better? Judomaster original recipe or Judomaster remix here?
I really like the Judomaster costume in the quarterly book. It dispenses with the other characters basically just wearing the Japanese flag, which is fine. But again, he's not in any way Japanese, so that's kind of a little
Also,
strange.
seems like a poor idea since you decided to fight on the side of the Allies.
Right,
during
dude.
World War II.
Someone
Yeah, there's a
might
lot
not
going
say
on
you're
there.
like,
None of it's
no,
good.
I'm with you. I promise. I'm
Wait.
just wearing the flag of our enemy. I swear to God.
It's
Also,
very strange.
I do martial arts, which you racists think that all Japanese people do. So
I like the costume of Judomaster too, because instead of having a fake ponytail, that appears to be his real hair. He's wearing what I imagine would be closer to what an actual martial artist would wear. Everything's flowy, so he can kick and stuff. Again, it looks like something. Judomaster 2 looks like someone who Shang-Chi would have had to fight in the 80s. So again, I'm all about that. And again, I go back to what I said before about how when they adapted Judomaster for the Peacemaker show, they completely redid the costume from the ground
they
up.
did.
And it seems a similar approach was taken here, where they were just like, we're keeping the name and we're keeping the general shtick. Everything else is getting a redo because, it has not aged well. So I wish we had seen more of this character. I like the Tiger Rip relationship that we did get in Law. I think that played out narratively and thematically very well. But yeah, this guy, it's kind of sad that he never got to come back into the spotlight.
Yeah.
if one can call a short story in Justice League Quarterly the so-called spotlight.
Oh man. Hey, you never know, characters, if you land at the right moment, you never know. You never know.
Honestly, when DC should have brought Judomaster back was probably like 1984 when Chuck Norris, there was a big ninja craze around then. Everybody, we always, were throwing ninja stars and shit at recess. I remember we had a rule for the playground. Like there was a rule that was like no fighting. There was a special rule by itself, no ninja kicking.
Really?
So that's how ninja shit was. The Ninja Turtles are about to start. So they might have should have taken a shot there because it might. But DC. By the time they decided to jump on a fad, it's been dead for a couple years.
Yeah, in 1994, I think Turtles were absolutely on their way out, and this would have been too early for Power Rangers. So Judomaster is right in the tiny nadir where there were no ninja characters, unfortunately.
Right.
Marvel superheroes, just throwing this out here, we got Justice League Quarterly featuring a new character.
Yeah.
That jumps, this is Judomaster. We're expecting him to jump off the page, become a very big extreme hit like Squirrel Girl from another quarterly sort of from Marvel superheroes. Was that a quarterly book every once a season?
I believe it was a quarterly book. It was the same here, spring, summer, fall,
that was
winter.
91.
Yeah. I mean,
to be fair, though,
a long time. So, and
it took her a while.
Squirrel Girl, even then, I remember actually reading that around the time it came out. Squirrel Girl has a certain je sais de quoi, you know what I mean? Like there's something that's just adorable and fun about her that just does not apply to Judomaster 2. Although, who knows, in 5 years, somebody could be like, it's time, and they put a little spin on it, and before you know it, he's drop kicking Darkseid, and now he's over.
Well, to be fair, he is sort of over right now. We have no idea what the name of that. We don't know what that Judomaster's name in Peacemaker the show is, right? We don't know that name.
We do not. It could be that you listen. James Gunn has just got to say, well, there is some precedent for this, and it's in that Mike Mignola cover of the Justice League Quarterly. And suddenly, if in the not too distant future you have found this episode because you were curious about this version of Judomaster, we're sorry, we have very little to offer you.
Yeah.
But buy it now, kids, before it's hot.
Yeah, seriously.
Oh, get in early.
The action heroes, the Sentinels, the whatever you want to call them, I kind of feel bad for them on a meta level because you're going to try to bring them back. You're going to try to relaunch them. You're going to try to integrate into something. But the first line out of anyone's mouth is going to be, aren't you the guy from Watchmen? Like you just, there's no chance. I don't care if Peacemaker runs for 100 episodes. At the end of the day, it's still going to be like, wait, weren't you the guy Comedian was based on? So just part of this is funny because it's like, well, we're going to try to do superhero stories like we used to do. And it's like, yeah, but I need Peter Cannon threatening to blow up New York to stave off something far worse. So I don't know. It's just kind of funny to try to watch them do this and just think in the back of my head, yeah, but you got an HBO show that won a bunch of Emmy Awards that none of you were really in. So I don't know.
That they've done a good job with Blue Beetle. As far as like, he seems very far away from Night Owl, especially when you factor in like the Jaime Reyes version. You know, I think that that's one that was like less recognizable. But yeah, pretty much everybody else. You put the question in something, people are gonna be like, "Isn't that Rorschach?"
Yeah.
Right. But to your point, I always did find it interesting that Denny O'Neil and Steve Ditko couldn't be more different, regardless of the fact that they're both legends in the relatively small comic book industry. You know, Denny O'Neil was an ardent pacifist. He never appeared at a convention without his peace sign logo. And Steve Ditko, of course, was an ardent objectivist who eschewed all of the publicity. And the fact that they both worked extensively on the question is so funny to me because, you know, and Dean mentioned this earlier, you go from basically a right-wing or hardline superhero who has no problem murdering someone who he considers as something bad, and you end up with this like Zen Buddhist postmodern warrior monk, and it's all the same character. So again, the question definitely continues to be very interesting. And as we've said, all of that was thrown out for the JLU, where he's just like a weaponized conspiracy guy. So the question, I think, is definitely the most interesting of all these guys. But again, when you have the co-creator of Spider-Man and Doctor Strange pouring his heart and soul into this, how could you get anything else?
Well, great discussion all around about two stories that we didn't think, you know, lived up to what we wanted it to. Regardless, we had the discussion. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into plugs here. Dean Compton, let's talk about the Unspoken Decade and where everybody can find you.
All right. Well, we're on Facebook doing 90s comic stuff, still on Twitter at Unspoken Decade. We're starting an Instagram at Unspoken Decade. It's very bare bones at the moment, but it exists. So you can go see it, you know, if you want. And you know, be both more the same 90s comics pictures. Obviously, we're at the UnspokenDecade.com. You know, we got some really good articles, you know, there for you to read, and, you know, more coming out about once a month thanks to Simbi fans' hard work. So, you know, check all that stuff out because it's the greatest goddamn thing you've ever seen.
That's right, damn it. That's right. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to this episode on the Source Material Comics podcast feed, most likely. Which is great because there's all sorts of other content out there on this feed you can listen to talking about comics. Specifically, Unspoken Issues is on here. Dean, Darry, and myself talking 90s comics. We got Chris Armstrong, other guests coming onto the show talking 90s comics. Also, the Source Material Comics podcast, where we just expand things out. It's like a book club for any comic in any era. And we have quite a few of those. We're over 300 episodes at this point. Actually, I got a spreadsheet. I looked at all of them. We got like 380 some episodes of source material out there. So most likely, thank you very much, you're going to be able to find something out there in order to listen to us just discussing comics. That's what we love to do here. That's it. We're done. Thanks for joining us. Have a good one. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us. Unspoken Issues is part of the UnspokenDecade.com, the home for 90s comics, blogs, and podcasts. Unspoken Issues also has a Facebook group you can join if you are interested. Just search the Unspoken Issues podcast and request to join. All of this would not be possible without W2Mnet.com and the Rattleitch Broadcasting Network, so make sure to seek them out for more podcasts. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please feel free to share, and we look forward to entertaining you again soon.